My name is Dennis Lee Flang, and this is the second video about tuning drums. Today, snare drum. So there's obviously not one single way to tune a snare drum. You can really just get any sound you like, and if it sounds good to you, it's tuned. So what I'm going over is really just sort of a traditional way of tuning a snare drum, and my sort of go-to way. I have a lot of different snare drums, but I kind of sort of instinctively tune them all the way that I like them, and then according to the situation I'm in, I might bring a different snare drum, but still have it tuned kind of where I like. So when I need a different snare drum sound, I tend to grab a different snare drum rather than waste a lot of time trying to make one snare drum sound like something that it can't really do. Although there are snare drums that are capable of doing pretty much anything. And one of those is my very favorite, all-time favorite Desert Island snare drum. This Q Drumco 5.5 by 14 brass Gentleman Series snare drum. And I'll have to do an actual video about why I love this snare drum as much as I do, because you know, I actually, if you followed me on Facebook a long time, you'll remember the post that I did when I got this drum. But anyway, so to make this not a really long video, we'll dive right into it. So the principle is the same thing as the tom that I demonstrated. I start off finger tight. The one thing about the snare drum though is that the top or bottom doesn't really matter which one you do first. So on this drum, the heads are completely loose. I'll start with the top head, finger tight, making sure that the aluminum rim is not touching the shell anywhere. So I'll go finger tight on all of them. I didn't take the heads all the way off because that's, you know, I'm sure you know how to put a head on a drum. I don't want to waste your time on that. So this is finger tight. Then I get my two keys and I just do about a half a turn. I go across the head in a cross shape, meaning after these two, this is an 8-lug drum, which again, I'll go over that in a different video, why I love 8-lug drums. But so in a cross pattern, which means these two are next, about a half a turn. And then these two, and then these two. Now, this is not as tight as I'm going to want it, but I just want to get a starting point. And that's actually pretty even already, so I'll go a little further. So for the top, I'm using a Power Center, which is my favorite snare head, batter head. Now on the bottom, same thing, everything finger tight. And I'll show you in a second what head I'm using on this. That's one of my sort of secret weapons, or a total sleeper head, if you will. Oh, that won't work. Put it here. This is, I hope you can read that, that's an Orchestral 300. Now, the normal snare side 300 head that Evans makes sounds great. It definitely projects when you need it, so I tend to use that one on stage most of the time, but it's pretty bright. So what I love about this head is that it sounds fatter and warmer, and it makes it seems like the entire drum just gets more low end. I don't know if that's scientifically correct, but anyway, this is a head you should check out, especially on vintage and metal snare drums. this thing just sounds incredible. So now, as far as the bottom head versus the top head, bottom head, I like it tabletop tight, as they call it. I go almost as far as where I feel like it might pop. Now, as far as tuning goes, I don't really tune a snare bottom head. I tension it. It's really not going to deliver an actual pitch or tone to your sound. And the whole nature of the drum, or the head and the function of the head, it really just needs to transport the vibrations of your hit into the snare wires, and you get that slap back. Tension of the head does matter in terms of, you know, if it's looser, you're going to get a slower response on the snare wires. If it's tighter, you're going to get a quicker, crisper response. The other thing is the snare drum has what is called a snare bed. I'm sorry if this drum is out of focus. It's either my head out of the frame or the drum. So a snare bed, what that does, I should probably showed it before I put the head on, but there's a little sort of dent in the shell here and here where the snare wires go. Now, a misconception is that it would create sort of like a bed for the snare wires to lay in. So if the snare beds are here, that there would be a sort of a bed for the snare wires to lay into, which is not actually true. What's happening is, because the head goes down here and here rather than being completely flat, it creates sort of a hill, or whatever you want to call it, a curve for the snare wires to lay on, so that in the middle of the drum the snare wires stay in contact with the head, because obviously this drum will be the other way around, and gravity will pull those snare wires down. So when the bottom of the head, or the bottom head, is basically kind of like this, it's going to compensate for this, what gravity wants to do, and it ensures that the snare wires are always touching the head completely. So that is what the snare bed does. Now, one trick that I've learned from my teacher when I was a teenager, when you get a lot of snare buzz, one thing that really works is like sympathetic snare buzz. Your bass player, your guitar player, they're playing and there's just a lot of buzz coming. Or when you play your tom and there's a lot of extra buzz. If you tune down the two tension rods on either side of the snare bed, if you take those down a little bit, you're going to get a little bit less snare buzz. It's not going to take it away completely, but it tends to be a good trick to keep that under control a little bit. So as soon as you're doing that, you're already, you know, like the tapping doesn't really make any sense, because this, I mean, sure, it has a pitch, but you just want to make sure you tension, in this case, these four, you want to make sure that those are tensioned evenly, but you'll have to do that by feel, or at least that's what I do. You could tap, but it's so high that you're not really going to hear much of a pitch. So I just kind of feel it, and then I kind of know, okay, this is as tight as I want to go. I might raise it up a little bit once the drum is on, but I think this is pretty much where I like it. So then the very important thing is the snare drum wires. These are my favorite snare wires for a long time. Pure Sound. That won't focus probably. Pure Sound Custom Pro Brass. The description on the website actually says that brass would be brighter than steel, but in my experience, the brass is a little bit mellower than steel, which I like, because I like the tone of the drum not to be overshadowed by the snare sound. So with the brass ones, they're a little bit mellower. They're still responsive and snappy and crisp, but they're a little bit less loud. I shouldn't say mellower, they're just a little less loud. So these would come with the quick release straps that Pure Sound makes, or Evans, D'Addario I should say, which are really cool. And in the studio I will usually use them. On the road I find them to be a little bit of a risk if you pull a snare drum out of a case in a hurry. It has happened to me that the clip came off and my snare wires were hanging from one side. So, but in the studio situation, they're definitely convenient for quick changes. So, let me turn a little bit, make sure you can see this. So when I put these wires on, I start on the butt end. And oh, so I should actually explain, since I'm not using those straps right now, the straps that come with it, I'm using simple, they call it gross ribbon, I think, gross grain ribbon, gross, disgusting, gross grain ribbon, which you can get at any craft store. I got this at Michael's. I think it's $4 for a 50-yard spool, so it'll last a lifetime. What I like about it is that when you release your snare wires, they are actually going down because the strap is so flexible. With the traditional Mylar straps that some people use, they tend to be so rigid that when you release your snare wires, you release the tension, but they don't actually go down. So sometimes they're still touching the head. So I find with these, it's very reliable. The strap will not ever break, and it's flexible. Okay, so hope you can see this. Putting the strap in here. Finger tighten. And then on the throw-off side, what I'll do is I'll do a couple of turns loosening the tension. Am I going the right way? I'm going the wrong way. Upside down. And on this trick throw-off, which is my favorite throw-off in the world, on this side you'll have to actually take one of the screws out. And put it in. So I will push the throw off all the way up, which is down, but since the drum's upside down, it's up. And I want to make sure that it's in there centered and straight. So it's not at an angle, it's in there straight. And then I will take the lever and pull it about 75%, and then back. So now it's in there straight. The other thing you want to pay attention to is that they are centered, the snare wires are centered on the head, meaning there's an equal amount of space between the butt plate, the end plate of the snare wires here and here, same amount, which you want to actually look at once they're tensioned. So tightening it at the butt end, tightening it here, and then that little bit of slack I created earlier, I'll take that back so that now they're actually tensioned, they're perfectly centered. The next important thing to make sure is that they are hanging flat, which they are. So I'm hoping you can see this. I'm probably not holding the drum straight, so they might not be as flat, but basically when the throw-off is disengaged, you want to look on the drum and make sure that the snare wires are hanging flat and not like that or like that. Make sure when the drum is flat. Yeah, when the drum is flat, the snare wires are actually perfectly flat also. It's hard to see because I'm at an angle in front of the camera. So that is my starting point. Now I can already tell that the top head is a little bit loose. So I'm gonna take that up a little bit. It's not perfect, but so not the overall drum might be a little too high now, but usually what I do is I'll actually listen to the drum in between rather than getting really you know, minuscule with the tuning, because I want to just see where the drum is at. So put it on the kit, and I had a different drum on here earlier, so I gotta raise it a little. Put some headphones on, not to kill myself. Let's see where we are. Okay, so right off the bat, snare wires are a little loose, and the drum is definitely a little higher than I like it. I mean, again, this is a versatile drum. It sounds killer at that tuning, but I like it a little lower. Switch it a little. And that's it. That sounds pretty good to me. And that's pretty much where I would want it. You know, it can go up, down. You could put a different head on here. If I want it to be a little fatter and a little less ringy, I might put a G2 on here. I might also use half a drum tack, which is a thing I've been known to do. Cut the thing in half and takes just a little bit of the ring out. As far as actual snare drum ring goes, I tend to not worry about it too much, because a lot of the time, as soon as you're in a mix, especially with bass guitar and distorted guitars maybe, or anything that has a good amount of low mids in it, that ring tends to disappear immediately. If you take it out immediately from the get-go when you're setting up, you're going to get a snare drum that is, once all the other low mids are added in the mix, there's not much left of your snare drum tone, if anything, and you're going to get a really dead sounding snare. So I usually don't worry about the ring too much. I'll do a little bit of a sound check, see with the music, you know, see what's going on, and then I'll apply a little bit of dampening to taste, which usually is half a drum tack or maybe a little piece of tape. Generally not much. If it has a really insane amount of ring, either there's something wrong with the drum or it's just not tuned well. So that's where I'll look rather than, you know, bust out a crap load of tape. And then different drums will, you know, like to live in different tunings. This is a fairly lively drum, although I could tune it down and add a little bit more dampening and you get a really fat drum too. But there are certain drums that will work a little bit better if I just want a thuddy snare drum, or if I want just a snare drum with an insane crack for some hard rock or metal. I might grab my copper plate Q drum. But this is the snare drum that pretty much will always work in any situation, and I usually just take wherever I go and it'll work pretty much always. And that's how I tune it. And it could go up or down a little bit, but this is sort of where I like it to be most of the time. And if I'm playing by myself, this is how I like to hear my snare drum, and this is probably about the tuning where I would have it. So that's it for snare drum. I apologize for taking so long with this video. I actually did 2 attempts before with some insane technical difficulties that made it sort of a drag to have to do it again, but here we are. Camera's still rolling, I see, and so is Cubase, so I think we're good. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I will take requests for videos on my Patreon page, which is patreon.com/DennisLeaflang. And if there's anything specific you want me to go over, I'd be happy to hear it and make a video. All right, thank you very much.